still can't believe this happened, but guess what? It did. Iron Man beat Magneto, and seemingly handily so as well. Although I would like to add in here that I think he, to a certain extent, got lucky. Magneto and Iron Man faced off during Avengers vs. X-Men. As the Phoenix Force was headed towards Earth, Iron Man squared off with Magneto, who attempted to argue that Iron Man was falling on the wrong side of history here, persecuting mutants just as Magneto had so long ago been persecuted years ago in Germany. However, Iron Man wasn't hearing this kind of logic and turned his back on Magneto, saying that he and the X-Men were the ones threatening all of humanity with their willingness to welcome the returning Phoenix Force. If you're wondering why I'm considering Magneto a hero, by the way, on this list, that is because he was a hero at this time. He has been sometimes he's a villain, sometimes he's a hero, and this time around he was actually working alongside the X-Men. Iron Man managed to arm himself with a non-metallic suit and pull off a few metallic tricks of his own to get in a few good hits to boot. But at the end of the day, Magneto was distracted by the Phoenix Force, which he sent snuffing out an entire planet on its way to Earth. And this made him give up the fight and kind of question even what side he was on, instead hoping that Iron Man would find the Scarlet Witch, whose help Magneto believed Tony would actually need. So really, the fight wasn't necessarily Tony fully winning, it was kind of like Magneto deciding, maybe I shouldn't be in this fight. Iron Man made short work of humbling Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four. Reed is known as the team's leader, Mr. Fantastic, who is known not just for his stretching powers, but more often for his brilliant intellect, being considered one of the most brilliant minds in the Marvel Universe. When Iron Man becomes a god, he makes everyone as smart as he is normally, which for Reed is actually considered a downgrade since he was actually smarter than Tony. This means that in trying to give him a gift, Stark actually lowered Reed's IQ instead of increasing it. Unintentional humble. Tony at least tried to humble the X-Men this time around by comparing lots with them. Not a great move on his part honestly, but hey, he tried at least. This all went down during the first Civil War when he had a chat with Emma Frost, one of his ex-flames. He attempted to compare the Avengers to the X-Men, saying that they also had to deal with a lot of prejudice too. However, while he did attempt to humble Emma into backing down, this actually ended up ultimately backfiring on him as Emma decided to turn up the heat just a notch, causing her to remind him of just how much hate and prejudice mutants had to deal with, including the catastrophic events that happened on Genosha. The Avengers have never had to deal with something on that scale, it's true, so obviously while this was an attempt at a humble, it wasn't completely successful, let's just say. Well, Tony and James Rhodes are actually known to be fast and best friends in the comics, they don't always see eye to eye. Like when Jim took Iron Man's place for a time and went on to serve as the hero War Machine. The two did not agree in terms of their approach to heroics, and this resulted in tension building between them, which ultimately culminated in a full-on fight. While Rhodes had some pretty scathing criticisms that he threw at Iron Man during the fight, Tony at one point seemed to have the upper hand during the physical altercation, which spanned across both of their series. Fortunately, both of them were spared from doing something boldly permanent to the other that they might regret by Bethany Cave, an ally and love interest of Tony's, who set off an EMP to shut down their suits, systems, and temporarily stop the fight between them. Iron Man majorly humbled the Hulk when he managed to be a part of the group that would send Hulk off-world. This secret superhero group was known as the Illuminati. The Illuminati was a group of superhero geniuses who believed that they best knew how to run the world and decided to operate in secret behind the scenes, making major plays to orchestrate just that. Thinking they were, you know, big know-it-alls, unsurprisingly, many of their plays actually ended up being pretty bad ones that had catastrophic consequences. Case in point, when they decided to send Hulk off-world in order to protect Earth from him. This would end up coming back to bite them in the butt when Hulk returned to Earth and, of course, World War Hulk happened. Axis was a wild time for a lot of heroes out there, but especially, I would say, for Iron Man. During the Axis event, many heroes and villains had their alignments reversed, and Tony even managed to escape his alignment being flipped once more back to normal, from bad back to good, so he would stay bad even after the event. Tony would turn Extremis into a program, like an app, which allowed users to change their physicality at will. At first the app was free, but after getting everyone hooked on it, Stark made it insanely expensive. This prompted Daredevil to confront Stark at his home, explaining that many of the users who could not afford the exorbitant costs were instead turning to a life of crime to help them foot the bill. Iron Man, or Superior Iron Man as he was known at the time, didn't want to hear this though, and so made short work of Matt, kicking Dee Dee out of his home by tossing tossing Matt literally off his balcony. In the MCU, Tony Stark has some pretty big beef with Bucky Barnes, Captain America's former sidekick turned brainwashed assassin super soldier known as the Winter Soldier. Both in the comics and the cinematic universe, it was Bucky Barnes who was behind the assassination of Iron Man's parents, and this is a large part of what drives a wedge between Captain America and Iron Man in the MCU. Although, let's be honest, tensions have always run somewhat high between these two, from even way back in the good old comics days. While Cap seeks to find redemption for Bucky and free him from his programming, Tony is out for revenge, and when he ends up going toe-to-toe with Bucky and his back is up against the wall, literally, he decides to not hold back and ends up blowing off Bucky's arm. His metal arm though, of course, his prosthetic at least, his other arm is okay, and of course, at least this would all be resolved with Bucky becoming a hero and even getting a new arm gifted to him by Black Panther and Wakanda, so in the end it all worked out, but man, what a moment. When Iron Man wants to be, he can be quite savage. Case in point, how he dealt with Spider-Man in the 2005 Iron Man series during Civil War. In issue number 14, Tony at one point faces off with Spider-Man and uses his suit to analyze Peter's Spidey sense. Based on that analysis, he is not only able to make his own version of Spider Sense, but is also able to neutralize and even mess with Spider-Man's. Iron Man then can use this against Spider-Man to misguide him, distracting him with a false warning before easily taking him out. Some of these moments are actually more embarrassing, I feel, for Tony, but I digress. For this one, we're looking to the pages of Civil War II. I know, I'm sorry to take you back to Civil War II, but here we go, here we are, this is what's happening. Here, Tony manages to kidnap the Inhuman precog Ulysses, who was at the center of the Second Civil War, for those that aren't aware of that. Ulysses was basically what the Second Civil War was all about. He could see the future. On Captain Marvel's side, she was like, I think we should persecute people before they've done anything wrong, and on Iron Man's side, he was like, no, we should wait till people actually do bad things before we punish them. Seems reasonable. Iron Man gets into Attilan quiet and stealthily and manages to also quickly get out with Ulysses in tow, all pretty much under the Inhumans' noses, leaving behind a decoy to distract them. By the time they're on to Tony, his plan is already in motion and it's seemingly much too late. He swaps out with the decoy, which explodes in his place, with Iron Man then getting to safety with Ulysses in tow, honestly making all of the Inhumans look pretty embarrassed. Pretty humbled, I'd say. All of the Inhumans. Although, let's talk about someone specifically for our final point here. Honestly, one of the Inhumans that Iron Man makes look the most ridiculous is Karnak. Just this writing, honestly, I feel like makes Karnak look really ridiculous. Poor Karnak. I feel bad for him, actually. I really like him and I think he's a super cool character, and I feel like this fight does not do him justice. His ability is that he can find anyone's weakness. The problem when it comes to fighting Tony, well, Tony claims he just doesn't have any weaknesses. Bum, bum. Oh, so ridiculous. Iron Man declares this before blasting and handily defeating Karnak in basically like a couple short panels, but I'm gonna just chalk this one up to the fact that at the time Iron Man was obviously, you know, not within the suit. That was a decoy, so when he says he doesn't have any weaknesses, he might more be referring to the misdirect in regards to the fact that, you know, he isn't actually there at the time, so how can you have weaknesses if you're not present? I guess. Maybe. Maybe that's how that works. Either way, I don't believe that Tony Stark actually has zero weaknesses, but that's what he declared here and it seemed to work out for him, so there you go. This one comes to us from X-Men Millennial Visions issue number 2. Here, Deadpool is hired by Sebastian Shaw to take out the entire, and I mean the entire, X-Men team. While normally Deadpool might question a task this vile, in this reality, because it is an alternate reality, it really is all about the paycheck for Wade. He says he'll take any job as long as the price is right, and it turns out here, it was. Deadpool succeeds in his mission 3 years after accepting it and gets paid an impossibly large sum of money by the sounds of it. He does such a good job that he then gets hired again to take out, get this, all mutants. Not sure how Shaw fits in there, since he's also immune, but regardless, Deadpool says that he has almost complete this task with only 4 mutants remaining for him to hunt down at this point: Banshee, Northstar, Sunfire, and Wolverine. We also see in the full single page of artwork with this short story that Deadpool, after defeating Hank McCoy, has turned the beloved beast fur into a sort of coat. This one wasn't the real Captain America. It wasn't even Hydra Captain America. More real than that version though, this was a version of Captain America who was possessed. He'd had his form taken over by an alien who Deadpool had thought would come to destroy mankind, but who in actuality had come to bring peace on Earth. But how was it going to bring peace to all of Earth? By in turn possessing all of its inhabitants and removing them of their free will. which of course would result in peace, but at a pretty high cost, I think, for most people. Deadpool at this time was imbued with cool armor by another entity known as Tiamat, initially prophesied to be the villain in this scenario, but actually aiding and fighting back against the alien entity, who of course had possessed a lot of Earth. While he struggled with the moral quandary of which was better, peace or free will, Deadpool ultimately chose free will and defeated possessed Captain America by kicking him in a very, very sensitive area. Only doing so, of course, in order to save the world. For those that don't know, Deadpool is actually a pretty big Captain America fan most of the time, so this isn't something that you would normally see happen. Nothing is more humbling than being tricked into falling into a giant pile of 372,844 pancakes in the morning, which is exactly what Deadpool did to Domino. This was back in the 2008 run of Deadpool when Wade was looking to join the X-Men. Granted, he did all this to Domino because in his crazy mind, it was a foolproof way to learn if Domino's offer to join the X-Men was really sincere, and not just part of a plot to try and eliminate him. He figured if he got rid of Domino and she was there to actually take him out under the guise of offering him, membership into the X-Men would then have sent a backup team with her, which would be deployed the moment that she was taken out. So when no team jumped out to take her place, he instead helped her up out of that big pile of pancakes and offered her some of the pancakes to eat for breakfast, believing her offer to be the real deal. These two are usually my favorite to see team up, and it's constantly a back and forth between them of who is messing with who. In this instance, we had the Cable/Deadpool annual where Deadpool, after messing with time travel, royally messed up both his and Nathan's day by putting them in a scenario where, as Cable said, they could very much actually die and they might not even survive. That is how badly Deadpool messed up here. Weirdly impressive considering how powerful both of these characters are, and especially when we consider that, they're teamed up together here. This is just the beginning of the story too. The rest of the annual is actually used to explain how they got here. I personally love this kind of storytelling where it just drops you right into the action and then we go back after to find out sort of how it all happened. In this turn of events, Cyclops played right into Wade's little hands. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know. Does Wade have little hands? Sometimes he does. If his hands have just been removed from his body and they gotta grow back, they're gonna be little hands. This was when Deadpool was given temporary membership to the X-Men. The story that also had all the pancakes we talked about. It turns out they had only offered Deadpool a place on the team because they wanted to keep a close eye on him. While hurt by this, Deadpool still did his best to play his part as an X-Men, or a fake X-Men, regardless of whether or not his membership was considered to be bona fide, by helping the mutants out. He took the fall for them and then in the end antagonized Psyche so that he'd fight an unmasked Deadpool while Wade was wearing his own unofficial X-Men costume. In the end, while he didn't want to, Cyclops was actually forced to admit that indeed Deadpool did have moves. This may be a bromance to Deadpool, but for Spider-Man, their relationship is mostly a nuisance. The two do seem to share some sincere moments of bonding now and then, like when Spider-Man and Deadpool bonded over talking about their incompleteness, the hole that they both have inside of them. But of course, Deadpool ruined it by offering to help Spider-Man with hole filling whenever he needed that. Yeah, awkward. Most of their moments are kinda like that. They finally have a moment of connection and then Wade usually ruins it. Wade aspires to be a good guy like Spider-Man, but to be honest, he struggles. He's stuck with an anti-hero mentality, which usually prevents him from going full hero most of the time. And it took a long time for Peter Parker to even accept that a killer like Wade was capable of goodness. I don't know why I put killer in quotes, he's definitely killed many people. When Deadpool was hunting down a daily reporter from the Bugle who was in the car with Peter, Wilson just tossed Parker out of the car and off a bridge without thinking, considering after that he may have actually just killed an innocent man. And when Parker returned in his Spider-Man guise to fight Deadpool, Deadpool claimed that, he knew Spider-Man would be around to save that guy he threw off the bridge, much to Parker's frustration. Like if Deadpool just rolled with it though. He's like, oh yeah, I knew that was gonna happen. I didn't think I was gonna kill that guy. Deadpool also sometimes is his own worst enemy, let's be honest. But other than fighting against his nature, he has also fought a literal evil version of himself. This version of Deadpool is simply known as Evil Deadpool. He was built from pieces of Deadpool that were hacked off and collected by Dr. Ella Whitby, who was once Wade's psychiatric doctor when he was in prison, and was revealed to be obsessed and in love with him. Yeah, the stalker vibes. After this patchwork version of Deadpool came to life, because all the pieces conjoined and made a very freaky looking version of Deadpool, it was revealed that this version of Pool was the opposite of the original Deadpool, and where Deadpool is normally a hero, evil Deadpool was, well, evil. Although still technically an evil version of a hero, which is how I'm gonna count him for my list. Check mark. Initially, Deadpool killed evil Deadpool by sacrificing the cure he had found for himself. It would have actually cured him of his healing factor, leaving him powerless and allowing him to actually die, which at that point was something he wanted. Deadpool was hoping to use it to end the pain of living for himself, but instead sacrificed it to get rid of his evil counterpart, thinking that, you know, as a hero that's obviously the right move. Don't worry though, that wouldn't be the last we'd see of evil Deadpool, who is of course far too fun of a character to kill off permanently after that first encounter. Well, a lot of folks may guess that Deadpool and Wolverine would be pretty evenly matched, especially with their team-up film coming to the big screen this summer. You actually might be surprised to learn that in most instances, it's actually Deadpool who comes out on top here. In the very first fight, this was also the case, and also, hilariously, this first fight actually also happens in a Wolverine issue, which is really painful, I feel like, for Logan. This was a case of Wolverine simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Both were looking for the same person, which is why they crossed paths. When Wolverine didn't have the answers that Wade was looking for though, Deadpool decided to make quick work of the old knucklehead. He ended up shish kebabbing Wolverine with his dual katanas and left him for a goner. Fortunately, Wolverine did recover and shows up later on in the same story, but still, this first fight definitely put Wade at 1-0 in terms of his fights against Wolverine. Saving the best for last in Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, we wait till the very last issue before Wade confronts Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. These two square off after Frank believes he has successfully defeated Deadpool, but guess what? Turns out he hasn't, of course. Instead, it seems as though the puppet master was dressed up in a disguise as Deadpool to act as a decoy, allowing Wade to reel in the real target, the Punisher himself. Before Wade blows him away though, he taunts the Punisher for being so easily fooled despite what drives him to fight back, a passionate and unyielding desire for vengeance. He's basically like, look where vengeance got you, lol. Joke's on you. After the deed is done, Deadpool also apologizes to the now deceased Punisher, saying that he knows that defeating Supes is normally Frank's thing, but that in the end, the Punisher simply wasn't able to think big enough to compete with Deadpool's reign of terror here. Gotta think outside the box. Of course, Deadpool doesn't just stop at the Punisher in his own Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe series. I mean, it is called Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, and that is exactly what happens. As I said, he doesn't even start with the Punisher. At the point of him taking out Frank in this reality, we're already 3 full issues in and onto our 4th issue, so you can imagine just how many people have just been taken out at that point. In Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, that is what Wade does. He kills not only the villains but also all the heroes as well, which is pretty wild. Why does this happen here? Well, unlike Frank's own Kill the Marvel Universe story, Deadpool is not actually out for revenge, but simply has come undone after realizing that he only exists in a comic and that his reality isn't actually real. It basically drives him kind of insane, or you could say maybe it drives him too sane. So in a way, he sees the killing as setting the others free from the prison they're trapped in, as well as, of course, setting himself free.
The early Spider-Man comics really put a focus on showing Spider-Man was a tough foe to beat. Even the X-Men had a hard time subduing the Spider. Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars 3 showed the iconic fight between Spider-Man and the X-Men, where it wasn't much of a fight for Spider-Man. He literally bursts onto the scene, taking out Cyclops and Professor X right from the get-go. He is leaping out of reach and backflipping out of range. His webs are a vital tool here. They suspend some team members and are said on panel to be stronger than steel. During the fight, after getting trapped in a web, Nightcrawler thinks to himself, his strength, his speed, unbelievable, he is awesome. Me too, Nightcrawler. Even when humbled, talent recognizes talent. Wolverine even yells as Spidey is swinging out that he made the team look like fools and amateurs. Spider-Man and Superboy went toe-to-toe, and now Superboy knows what it feels like to be squashed by a spider. This one might be controversial for this list, since there was a bit of a God in the machine happening here. For this face-off, lots of DC and Marvel characters were pit against each other and fans could vote which character of a face-off they wanted to see win. So Spider-Man ended up winning that, which is humbling on its own, but then that is why he won the battle in the comic too. It's not like the comic battle wasn't good though. Spidey held his own against Superboy. At one point, a water tower gets busted and floods where the two heroes are fighting. Superboy moves to attack Spider-Man, but instead he gets a personal web experience and crashes into a high voltage box, and you can imagine how that went in the water. The fight was over, Superboy was cooked. The hero for hire Luke Cage became the humbled hero for hire after a tussle with Spider-Man. Cage was hired by J. Jonah Jameson because he hates Spider-Man and he thinks he caused the death of Norman Osborn. Technically Peter did, but no one knows Norman was the Green Goblin, so everyone just thinks that Spider-Man took out a random well-known figure. Luke was hired by Jameson to take out the dangerous Spidey. Jameson offered to pay Cage $5,000 for the job. This comic came out in the 1970s. Take a guess how much $5,000 is today. Over $35,000. J. Jonah Jameson was willing to pay $35,000 to get rid of Spider-Man. He hates him. He never ended up paying the money because, spoiler, the fight with Cage ends with Cage on Spider-Man's side, but it was tough to get him there. Spidey ends up pinning Cage with his webs. He can't move his arms. Once again, Cage is super strong, so it's amazing this is working. While pinned down, Spider-Man is able to explain his side of the story, leading to Cage taking Peter's side and rejecting the job. Humbled him so hard, he quit. It's hard to win against someone who literally can't die and can heal from anything, i.e. Deadpool, and yet Spidey does manage to humble the merc with a mouth every once in a while. It depends on the universe, of course, but one time Spidey was the victor was in Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon. The episode is ridiculous, it has Deadpool in it. It's expected. Deadpool transports him and Spidey to a different realm that is very silly. Spider-Man turns into a whale at one point, there are barn animals, truly it's wild, but Spidey comes out on top, defeating Deadpool by throwing a book of morality at him. Knowing the character, funniest choice Marvel could have made. When it comes to speed, Spider-Man is tough to beat. Not even Wonder Woman stood a chance. There is an Earth out there with all our favorite DC and Marvel heroes, and it's not Hollywood, it's Earth 7642. It was featured in Marvel Treasury Edition 28. In this story, Spider-Man and Wonder Woman end up fighting each other, but only because Wonder Woman doesn't know Spidey that well and thought he was a threat. In her words, it's Spidey's fault that people don't trust him at first because he has a pretty creepy routine. Spider-Man does acknowledge that the spider thing might be unsettling, but in the actual fight, Wonder Woman is throwing more punches. Spidey is holding back because he knows they're both good guys, he just needs Wonder Woman to stop long enough to explain himself. To Wonder Woman's dismay, she clocks that Spidey is way faster than she is, even saying that she is plodding along compared to Peter. She's further humbled when the lights go out, and Peter technically has the upper hand because of his spider sense. Fun fact, Superman and the Hulk face off against each other in this comic. Spider-Man tried to stop the Hulk first, but Supes wouldn't allow it. Spider-Man got his chance to fight the Hulk later. One of the earlier times Spidey fought the Hulk was in Amazing Spider-Man 328. In that issue, Hulk remarks that Spidey was a lot stronger than he remembered, and Spider-Man ends up winning the fight because Hulk had to escape because the sun was coming up, and at this point he could only Hulk out at night. Kind of like a vampire. A later fight between the two happened on the news. We watched it as if we were sitting in our local bar, which was kind of fun. The broadcast shows a tough fight between the heroes. Hulk looks like he's winning at one point, patrons start placing bets, but then Spidey kicks Hulk into a wall and a cement truck falls on him. The Hulk is done hulking and is now under a cement truck sulking. There were a few other times when the heroes brawled, but some of them had outside factors that made the fight kind of unfair, like tranquilizer gas for the Hulk. Peter has told MJ that he thinks he can kill the Hulk, but he has a no-kill rule and never wants to have to make that choice. Spider-Man once gave his all and literally fought to make the Fantastic Four the Fantastic Five. The very first issue of the Amazing Spider-Man comics kicked off the series with a big bang. Spider-Man brawled the Fantastic Four for a shot on the team, and he did it for a number of reasons. One, he was just starting out and deemed an outlaw in his city, so joining an established super team would improve his image. And two, Spider-Man is poor. That has been drilled into our heads since Well, this comic. So Spidey wanted to join the team in the hopes that they would pay him and he could keep his secret identity. Spidey jumped into the F4 headquarters through a window but got trapped in a fancy glass cage. He was infiltrating their headquarters after all. He used his strength to escape the cage, punched the Thing clear across the room right into the Human Torch. He used his webs to trap Mr. Fantastic's hands. His spider sense helped him find and trap the Invisible Woman, and when the Human Torch started throwing his fire, Spidey effortlessly leapt out of reach. He really was showing off here to try and make that team. Spidey ended up not joining the team when he found out they don't pay a salary. Spider-Man ends up fighting the Chameleon, and news of his strength and power makes the rounds. The comic ends with the F4 reading about Spidey and remarking how strong he is and what his future will be, and if they should worry about him. Captain America may have humbled Spider-Man in the MCU, but it's a very different story in the comics. Cap even once admitted that he wasn't as strong as Spider-Man. But the true humbling Cap-Peter moment happened in an alleyway. Peter at this point, he's wanted by the FBI, when is he not? Cap is trying to reason with Peter, but Peter is having a rough go of it. Cap ends up getting punched in the face, but he is holding back a bit, I think, because he can tell that Peter is just acting out because he's going through it. But he does still experience quite a humbling moment on Peter's behalf. Cap takes his shield to block another punch. Peter grabs that shield and smashes it in the Captain's face. I wouldn't leave my house for a day if someone beat me with the symbol of my superhero persona, and then to top it off, Peter escaped, adding some salt to the wound. Miles Morales, the main character of the Spider-Verse movies, he humbled all Spider-Men in a way that I have never seen before. Truly, if I was there, I would be so embarrassed. I'm talking about the scene in the second movie when he's running away from like literally every spider person and animal and machine and car and ever evades all of them. He truly is the main character. Sure, he had a bit of help from some friends, but every spider in the universe is coming after him and he escaped. We have to give him his flowers. Iron Man might be a father figure to Peter, but that doesn't mean Spidey will pull his punches when they fight. The Spider-Man and Iron Man of the MCU are so tame in comparison to the comic versions of themselves. Like, MCU Tony would give Peter a juice box and play catch in the backyard. Comic Tony has tried throwing Peter across Manhattan. The Iron Man suit, it is very powerful. It's got top tech in it, Tony is very smart, but he is just an average, vulnerable man without his suit. And he tends to forget that and needs a little reminder every once in a while. Spider-Man has given him that reminder quite a few times. In Amazing Spider-Man 536, Iron Man is after Spidey because Peter is against the Superhuman Registration Act. Peter wins the fight, he overrides Iron Man's armor and then webs him in the face for good measure. Amazing Spider-Man Annual 20 features a bunch of Tony-like time travel stuff, but the important thing to this video is that Spider-Man gets really mad at Tony at one point and throws him into a construction site and then attacks Tony until Tony is saved by time shifting out of that reality and back to his reality.
Is the power of many gods enough to stand against the power of one epic Norse god? Apparently not. At least not in terms of what we saw unfold in the pages of DC vs. Marvel. DC vs. Marvel came out at a time when the comics industry was struggling. To encourage sales, the two biggest comic book publishing competitors of DC and Marvel decided to team up and let their characters duke it out in the pages of this comic. This collaborative project allowed us to see characters like Thor and Shazam, or as he was known then, Captain Marvel, face one another and also of course see who comes out on top between them. When it came to this pairing, it turned out that Thor was ultimately the victor between the two once the secret of Billy's transformation into Captain Marvel was revealed. Sorry, Billy. What are some gods that you would like to see Thor face? Let me know down in the comments. And do you think he'd win? I don't know. Let us know. Thor and Hulk is like a mashup for the ages. We've seen these two go toe to toe more times than I can honestly count. And while I'd say that most of the time I've actually seen Hulk win between these two, this isn't always the case. In fact, in Thor Ragnarok, the only reason that Hulk even wins that fight is because the Grandmaster interferes and shocks Thor into submission after he discovers he can tap into his lightning powers even without Mjolnir in hand. In the comics, Thor has beaten Hulk not by channeling his inherent powers himself, but actually through the use of Mjolnir. With one swift hit from the hammer, Thor was able to knock out Hulk and claim victory. At least, you know, that one time. At one point, Thor is manipulated into working for the Führer, the leader of Germany during World War II. He is an amazing asset, obviously, for Germany to have on their side, clearly, and ends up proving himself so when he goes up against the Invaders in Invaders issue number 33. At the behest of the Führer, he is sent out to take out Joseph Stalin, but ends up instead handily knocking out Union Jack, who was disguised as Stalin at the time, prepared to be eliminated, I imagine, if need be, in his place. All for, world peace, I guess, all for the side of the Allies. Fortunately, it is in this battle that Thor realizes the villainous nature of the man he is working for and ends up being able to use Mjolnir to withdraw the damage he has done and bring Union Jack back to life. Thank goodness. I'm so glad that Thor realized he was on the evil side of that war. Union Jack in this iteration is Brian Falsworth. Brian was serving back in World War II and started out as a spy working alongside his friend Roger Aubrey before he inevitably ended up as a superhero working as a member of the Invaders hero team. He is a super soldier, though not as strong or as experienced, I would say, as Captain America. He doesn't get to live nearly as long as Cap does either. He's got a much shorter time in the comics. Deadpool used to love dressing up as Thor, but while people say imitation is the best form of flattery, let's keep in mind that that's a Midgardian saying and not an Asgardian one. I don't even know Asgardian sayings or idioms. Eternal life is like an apple, is that one of them? That should be one of them because it's kind of true. So of course when Thor came across Deadpool impersonating him, he was not too pleased. And look, Deadpool is a pretty gifted fighter and also has that healing factor on lock, but he's not nearly as powerful as Thor is, let's be honest. Not by a long shot. So of course, no one was surprised when Thor made quick work of Deadpool with his hammer Mjolnir. Namor is more of an anti-hero than a full-on superhero, I will grant you that. But I doubt we're going to be doing any top 10 times Thor humbled anti-heroes lists anytime soon, so I'm just going to seize the opportunity to focus on the hero part of anti-hero and feature Namor here. Namor and Thor have fought on a few different occasions, and of those fights that I'm aware of, it was a pretty brief and painful experience for Namor. Namor is usually known for being an underappreciated heavy hitter in the comics. He's the first official mutant to appear over at Marvel Comics, and he's surprisingly strong. Not only that, but he also rules an entire underwater kingdom, so yeah, like I said, a pretty powerful guy, but none of that is enough to protect him from Thor's wrath or his fists. Despite many more well-known and often considered to be more powerful characters out there struggling to face Thor, Wonder Man is actually a character who has fared pretty well, despite not being as well loved as some of the others on this list, or as iconic, I would say. Now don't get me wrong, I love Simon, and despite his often lackluster costumes, I do think he deserves more love in the comics. So here we are. Wonder Man was often known for having fists that were actually stronger than Thor's hammers. It was basically a saying people said about Wonder Man, and for a while this was even proven to be true when the two actually came to blows. But what happened? Clearly he can't have always fared well in a fight against Thor if he's on this list, right? Well, Thor eventually used the spinning of his hammer to collect all the energy that Simon was throwing his way and used it to charge up his own hits, swinging right back at Wonder Man with everything he had thrown at Thor, which was how Thor was able to get even and beat Simon in the end. Even though it might seem insane, Thor actually was powerful enough to defeat the Sentry. It's true. Or, I mean, at least kind of. Really, Thor went up against the Sentry's alter ego, the Void, whom Norman Osborn was trying to use for his own means during the siege of Asgard in the Dark Reign days. During, literally, siege. Well, Void was a villain who once scared pretty much all of the heroes based in New York City, which, let's be real, for Marvel is honestly a lot of them. Here Thor took on alone and even managed to defeat both the Void and Sentry. Though granted, this was at Bob's behest, so kind of having, I think, a little bit of the Sentry's help, at least mentally, to overwhelm the Void. You see, Sentry saw what was happening and he didn't want to be used in this way, so he basically begged Thor to put him out of his misery here and end him. Still, the fact that Thor was able to fight back against the Sentry's dark alter ego, who has been established as being immensely powerful, and was able to seemingly end the Sentry by throwing him into the sun, at least for a time, was pretty impressive. This was less humbling and more of Thor ending his friend in the name of mercy, but at the end of the day, it's an impressive victory, so I felt compelled to share it with you here. I have mixed feelings about this humbling moment, but it did happen, and I do want to have at least one lady on this list. And these two together are often paired up as being iconic since they both boast of lightning powers. So here we go. We are talking about Storm, a leader of the X-Men and at one time Queen of Wakanda. We all love Storm here, and I'm honestly sure Thor would never even think to fight against her normally, but in this instance he was forced forced to do so during the 1999 Contest of Champions. Storm seems to be outmatched when it comes to their power sets at first. We have to consider this was also the late 90s before Storm had realized her full potential and was established as a true and official goddess. Thor ends up having her on the ropes here when Storm manages to get up close. It's honestly not a bad tactic considering that I feel like Mjolnir can pack more of a punch at range, and Thor's powers can be even more accurate and deadly in terms of targeting her alone if we got some distance. However, in the end, it isn't Thor's hammer or his fists or powers that defeat her, but instead a much more surprising move, honestly, that disarms her: a kiss. I gotta say, I wasn't expecting that. Thor used the kiss to literally take Storm's breath away, causing her to faint and granting him the W. You might be surprised to hear that Thor is powerful enough to dance with even the wielder of the power cosmic and come out on top. That is exactly what happened when Thor faced off against Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer at the time is soaring through the cosmos when of course he runs into Thor. From there he decides to attack Thor, who at that moment was fighting against Beta Ray Bill. Now if you're wondering what the heck, why are these two fighting, when for the most part these two are actually often known to be allies, it had to do with Thor's mental state at that time. He was in the midst of being manipulated basically. He was basically suffering from warrior madness. Bill even attempts to join in on the fight against Thor with Silver Surfer again, but in the end Thor calls on extra power from his own imagined Valkyrie, who represents, like I said, his own warrior's madness, and uses said power to best Silver Surfer, even doing enough damage to completely knock him out. In fact, Silver Surfer may have been doomed if it wasn't for the interference of Adam Warlock here. When Adam Warlock first crossed paths with Thor, he was much less experienced. He had basically just been born and he thought that Lady Sif would make a good mate for him. His mistake, obviously. Thor disagreed. While Adam Warlock is usually known for being one of the most powerful entities in all of Marvel Comics, at the beginning he simply just didn't have the experience or know-how to take on a seasoned and powerful warrior like Thor. So, right off the bat, Thor made quick work of him when he attempted to put the moves on Lady Sif. Not only that, but later on, when Warlock faces Thor again, when he is down with the warrior madness, having come to the rescue of Silver Surfer, he and Norrin both get beat so badly that they are forced to retreat.
The Silver Samurai is a bit more of a complex figure. I wouldn't necessarily call him an outright superhero, so let's just get that out of the way. But he has genuinely acted as a superhero on multiple occasions. When Wolverine was training in order to use the Muramasa blade, he went to the Silver Samurai for that training. While the samurai had trained Logan at a disadvantage, meaning he gave Logan only half of a wooden sword while he had two, after about 5 days, Logan had gained enough skill to not only defeat Silver Samurai, but he even had 6 different ways that he could have done it, and chose the least painful of the 6 different ways Samurai had left himself open to, as to not hurt the man's pride too much. He held back on Silver Samurai and tried not to humble him too much, so that's why at this point we'll stay up here near the top of the list. But coming in next, Wolverine and Cyclops are not really the greatest of friends, even if they are now technically part of a throuple. I'm not getting into that. But while there are moments where Wolverine has physically humbled the leader of the X-Men, this next spot was more of a fun little jab at Cyclops' sense of style. When the two of them have to fight all of the Sentinels in Wolverine and the X-Men number 40, there's some tension as to whether Logan is just gonna bail out and let Cyclops handle the robots all by his lonesome. Now, he doesn't do that, and the two heroes destroy every single Sentinel around. After they're limping out of the place, Wolverine mentions how they look like hell, and Cyclops fires back saying, "You always look like hell," which is when Wolverine says the man who wears sunglasses indoors. It's honestly a pretty wholesome, kinda cute, funny moment, but even then, Wolverine is still dissing Cyclops just a little bit. This next humbling comes to us in Wolverine and the X-Men number 12, written by Jason Aaron. Starring Rachel Gray, she's charged with attempting to hunt down Wolverine and Hope Summers after the duo escaped at the end of the previous issue. She tracks Wolverine and the other Avengers on the run, including Giant Man, Spider-Woman, Thor, War Machine, Captain America, Quicksilver, and Beast. Now, a battle eventually ensues as Rachel reveals her crew: Kid Gladiator, Iceman, Angel, and Namor. Now, Kid Gladiator is the one here who gets humbled, and it was kind of a long time coming as the kid was a little too cocky for his own good. After giving Wolverine a pretty ruthless beatdown, admittedly, and, quote, commanding Wolverine to pop his claws, Wolverine pops up, and in one move he explains how he's studied to be able to bring down anything that lives, including superpowered Strontians like Kid Gladiator, using a single pressure point to subdue the kid before telling him he should have stayed in school, kid. James Howlett and Eddie Brock have a lot in common. Both have bonded with the Clintar symbiote known as Venom. Both are incredibly popular anti-heroes known for brutal tactics when dispatching evil. Wolverine and and Venom have also crossed paths and have fought on more than one occasion. The Claws and Web story, Venom Tooth and Claw, and Wolverine Exit Wounds #1. However, I'm going to talk about 2018's Venom Annual #1. Venom and Wolverine get into a bar fight pretty early on in Venom's career as a villain. Now this fight takes place after Claw and Web, since Wolverine does remember fighting Venom before. Venom barges into the bar looking for Spider-Man, but Wolverine gives him a pretty hard time. The two fight, with Venom keeping Wolverine at bay and Wolverine continuously just charging at him over and over. Venom technically does deal more physical damage to Wolverine here, but Logan manages to break Venom down by shrugging off everything he did to him and always coming back, dismissing Venom's grudge against Spider-Man as childish and absurd, which leaves Venom humiliated as he just wanders off. Now, in what is a pretty inconsequential moment coming to us in New Avengers #15 from 2010, the Avengers are outside of Avengers Mansion doing a little sparring session. And the two we start off with are Iron Fist and, of course, Wolverine. The other Avengers watch on as these two engage in a battle of fisticuffs, not using their powers. They seem to be pretty well matched though, both blocking, dodging, and landing attacks on each other. Now, Iron Fist is obviously a martial arts based hero, and it would be easy to think that he has the upper hand in this conflict. But Wolverine is arguably one of the best hand-to-hand fighters in Marvel Comics. After Wolverine gets Iron Fist in a hold, Rand moves out of it, and before he can make his next move, Wolverine socks him with a punch that has him hitting the ground. Now Wolverine says that he was fighting at about a 6 just then, while Iron Fist says that he was at a 3, but I don't know, man, that's pretty embarrassing. Then Squirrel Girl just outmatches Wolverine with no problem, so things are a little wonky here anyways. Next up, the Thing is one of the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe, able to stand toe-to-toe with the Hulk in battle. He and Wolverine have had their scrapes, and most of the time Logan's been on the losing side of things. But in one altercation taking place in Fantastic Four 1961 issue 374, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Professor Hulk, and Spider-Man, who had previously taken the place of the Fantastic Four, were hunting for Johnny Storm, who had accidentally just destroyed part of Empire State University. This led to an altercation between the four heroes and the actual Fantastic Four. When Wolverine went to attack Susan Storm, Ben Grimm grabbed the Canadian and slammed him into the ground, calling him an arrogant little creep. But Wolverine, in his rage, used all his might and slashed Ben across the face, disfiguring the Thing in a way that actually severely affected the character. The character even went on to wear a face mask for a chunk of time to hide his wounds. Wolverine is a Canadian, and as such, he is pretty closely tied to the Canadian superhero team Alpha Flight. In Uncanny X-Men 1963 number 355, Alpha Flight had been misled to attack Wolverine by Department H, and even though this is just solo Wolverine with no adamantium, he manages to make them look like a bunch of chumps. Starting off the fight, he knocks down Guardian and is seemingly taking on the entire team at once, with Puck jumping on his back and catching some swift elbows before being thrown off. He then faces Flex, who he simply just punches the lights out of, and when the fight finally begins to settle into some more peaceful talks, Wolverine gets sucker punched by Sasquatch, a gamma-powered Goliath, I'll remind you, who Wolverine then goes charging into, starting a fist fight, which is promptly interrupted by the arrival of the X-Men. Now, while Wolverine in the comics is very much a badass, he can sometimes find himself being a little silly and being outsmarted or outmoved by others from time to time. But I gotta say, his live-action counterpart, played iconically by Hugh Jackman, is a pretty consistent badass who puts almost everyone in their place. Now, this is a very small moment, but my god is it iconic. So this is the first X-Men movie. Wolverine is just suited up for the very first time and is joining the X-Men on a mission to rescue Rogue from the Statue of Liberty. It's the lead up to the movie's climax. The team enters into the statue, but because his entire skeleton is covered in adamantium, Wolverine sets off the metal detectors, which he then destroys with a quick slash. Now Cyclops, being all mature and wannabe father figure like, gives Wolverine a stern old look of disapproval, to which Wolverine responds by retracting all but his middle claw. He gave Cyclops the Wolverine middle finger. Kids everywhere lost their damn minds. Sure, it's not one of the most clever moves, but god, I loved it. Wolverine was introduced in Incredible Hulk Volume 1, number 180 and 181 as an antagonist deployed by Canada's Department H to fight the Incredible Hulk, and thus a rivalry was born. One of the best fights the two have had comes from Savage Wolverine number 5, featuring Wolverine teaming up with Amadeus Cho and Shauna the She-Devil to prevent the destruction of a machine in the Savage Land. However, the monster this machine is meant to hold back is a pretty dastardly devil, and has been luring people to destroy the machine for it. After failing to do this to Wolverine, the monster instead turns its sights on the Hulk. The Hulk comes to the Savage Land and begins going wild, destroying everything in his path on his way to the machine. Now naturally, Wolverine alongside his companions stands in the Hulk's way, leading to a fight. But in a surprise move, not really seeing another option, Wolverine leaps onto the Hulk at the last second and runs his claws straight into his skull, lobotomizing him. This is still the Hulk we're talking about here, so he does regenerate pretty quickly, but this is an incredible feat for even Wolverine. And lastly, I'm coming back with another live action Wolverine moment because 1, I couldn't help myself, and 2, it's absolutely iconic. Now there are so many moments from the many movies to choose from, but I think one of my absolute favorites comes from X-Men First Class, when Wolverine shows up for less than 30 seconds. Every PG-13 movie gets one F-bomb, and this movie used it perfectly. During a recruitment montage during the 1960s, Professor X and Magneto are traveling around recruiting various mutants to their team when they find one James Howlett enjoying a cigar in a bar. They walk up, and just as they get their names out, James here barely acknowledges them as he says, "Go F yourself," and continues on with his cigar. It's beautiful.
First up is Wolverine vs. the Hulk. Talk about making an entrance. The Canadian superhero burst onto the scene on his home turf in issue 181 of the Incredible Hulk comic books. Wolverine was working for the Canadian federal government at the time and ended up having to jump into a fight between Hulk and the Wendigo. This was truly a clash of the titans, and the Wolverine proved to the world that he could hold his own. He ended up taking on both characters before he eventually sided with Hulk, and the pair worked together to take down Wendigo. It's nothing new for Marvel heroes to fight each other when they first meet, but this one hit a little heavier than usual. There was quite a bit of tension between Wolverine and Hulk for a very long time. There's always a feeling that neither one of them actually got over it. Whatever the case though, it was still the perfect way for Wolverine to announce his arrival and put the Hulk on notice. Up next, Wolverine tosses Deadpool. Well, we already know these two have had some wild rides together. The relationship between Wolverine and Deadpool can simply be described as complicated. Although they have fought alongside each other on numerous occasions, they've also had plenty of situations that have turned sour. Back in 2009's Hulk vs. Wolverine, the Canadian government tasked their hero with tracking down the Green Giant. The only problem was that Team X, which included Wolverine's old buddy Deadpool, managed to capture him. Although Deadpool had his usual basket of witty insults prepared, Wolverine got the last laugh when he tossed the foul-mouthed hero into a revived Hulk. To add even more insult to injury, the Green Giant then smashed Deadpool into a wall. It might not have been an electric fight on this occasion, but Wolverine definitely got the last laugh. Next up is Wolverine vs. Captain America. These two have had an up and down relationship over the years, but things really got interesting in the third issue of Avengers vs. X-Men. It's obvious that the two sides had very different opinions on certain topics, and this boiled over into a hard-fought battle over the Phoenix Force. Wolverine had informed the Avengers that Cyclops did not have good intentions for the Phoenix Force and was ready to kickstart the war. Captain America, however, was not buying what Wolverine was selling and began to have doubts about the X-Men. The two heroes eventually came to blows, and Wolverine actually did much better than most people might have assumed. He was really giving Captain America a run for his money until Giant Man stepped in and hammered Wolverine from behind. Wolverine might have lost this one, but it was only because Captain America needed some outside help to win. After that, we have Wolverine vs. Spider-Man. If you want to talk about epic showdowns, then this one is definitely near the top of the list. Wolverine and Spider-Man were both placed in Berlin during the Cold War for two very different reasons. Spider-Man was on assignment as a photographer, but Wolverine was actually trying to help a spy who also happened to be an ex-girlfriend of his. The spy wanted Wolverine to put her out of her misery, as the Germans and the Soviets were both on her tail, but Spider-Man did not want this to happen. He wanted to bring the elusive spy to justice, and this ultimately meant that he would have to fight Wolverine. The two had a spirited tilt, and although Wolverine didn't come out with W on this occasion, his tremendous skills ultimately got him exactly what he wanted. Spider-Man's rage had risen to new levels, and he ended up striking the spy with a lethal punch, which of course is what Wolverine set out to do in the first place. Up next is Wolverine vs. North Star. Enemy of the State was a pretty wild time in the life of Wolverine. This story saw the Canadian hero lured to Japan, where he was eliminated by Gorgon, only to be resurrected as a powerful slave of an evil ninja syndicate. He then worked as a soldier for the Hand and Hydra Alliance and attacked pretty much everyone in sight. Enemy of the State includes some memorable battles with Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, and many more. But Wolverine's biggest statement from all of these fights was his battle against his fellow Canadian, North Star. Wolverine came out of this fight as the only survivor surviving hero, but his crazed rampage was finally put to a stop by the rest of the X-Men. Who knows how many more he could have taken down had the X-Men not intercepted him. Our next fight takes us back to Wolverine vs. Deadpool. On this occasion, Wolverine actually managed to take his acquaintance's head off with his razor-sharp claws. This all occurred in the 44th issue of Cable and Deadpool when the foul-mouthed hero went solo to try and save Weasel from Hydra. This unfortunately meant that he was going to cross paths with Wolverine, who had been tasked with taking out the Hydra base's section commander. Of course, that commander happens to be Weasel, and the conflicting jobs ended up resulting in another fight between the two heroes. Unfortunately for Deadpool, Wolverine took a quick swipe at his frenemy's head and managed to clear it right off of his shoulders. While this would have been the end of pretty much anyone, Deadpool's special abilities only called for his head to be stuck back on his neck so he could return to normal. Next on our list is Wolverine vs. Cyclops. This was a spirited tilt that included many years of built-up rage. Now, to say things have been rocky between these two heroes over the years would be the ultimate understatement. It's no secret that Wolverine and Cyclops never saw eye to eye on many things, but it rarely ever boiled over into violence. That is until Cyclops decided to send a young mutant to eliminate a group of Hellfire Club goons. This decision sent Wolverine over the edge, as he couldn't understand why Cyclops would send such a young person to commit this terrible crime. The two exchanged verbal jabs before they finally let their fists do the talking and kicked off one of the craziest fights we've ever seen. A Sentinel eventually showed up to put a stop to this rage-filled battle, so there really was no definitive winner. The intense fight did, however, remind everybody that Wolverine meant business. Now we have Demon Wolverine versus the X-Men. The Canadian superhero was dragged into hell on multiple occasions, but his demon-possessed fight against his X-Men buddies was one for the ages. The Red Right Hand summoned Logan to the underworld and Logan goes to hell, only for his body to be completely taken over by a demonic entity. This demon was hell-bent, pun intended, on tracking down the rest of the X-Men and eliminating them with one of their own allies. While the real Wolverine was doing his best to escape from the underworld, his possessed body took on the X-Men in a battle for the ages. Although it wasn't technically Wolverine himself, this is still one of the hero's most memorable fights. The demon made good use of the body while it was in control, and showed off the tremendous power that Wolverine is actually capable of. Now thankfully the X-Men managed to put a stop to their evil friend, but this was one battle that we will never forget. Up next is the Deadpool fight from Wolverine Origins. There's absolutely no shortage of conflicts between these guys who always seem to be brought together by fate. While Deadpool was on a mission to eliminate his old pal Wolverine, turns out there was an unexpected twist that led him to this situation. Deadpool was hilariously using all sorts of cartoon attack methods to eliminate Wolverine, such as dropping a piano on his head, but nothing seemed to work. After many tense battles and verbal tirades, the two heroes eventually got serious and discovered a little more about why they were in this situation. As it turns out, Wolverine was actually the one who hired Deadpool in the first place to eliminate himself. He did this to lure Daken out of hiding. This of course meant that Wolverine was able to use Deadpool to get the last laugh and ensure that he got exactly what he wanted. It also must have stung Deadpool pretty bad that he was unable to complete his task of eliminating Wolverine. And finally we have Wolverine vs. the Grey Hulk. Logan came to blows with his longtime enemy once again for one of the most memorable fights in Marvel's history. In issue 340 of The Incredible Hulk, Wolverine decides to take matters into his own hands while Grey Hulk is on a rampage. He jumps into another battle with the Raging Giant to put an end to the Smash Fest, and both heroes really gave it everything they had. There was plenty of back and forth and lots of destruction, and Wolverine actually managed to push Grey Hulk to the brink. It probably would have been over against almost any other hero, but Hulk's healing abilities allowed him to make a comeback and get the final decision in this fight. Although Wolverine might have lost in the end, he was able to taste a bit of victory against one of his toughest opponents. This also put the Hulk on notice that his enemy was stronger than he might have originally thought.
Number 10. Deadpool. If you thought Deadpool was a brutal vigilante and sometimes straight up anti-hero, wait till you see him go up against Moon Knight. In Vengeance of the Moon Knight issue number 8, these two face off. And while you might think Deadpool's healing factor would give him a leg up here, it is actually Moon Knight who comes out the victor in their fight. What's interesting is seeing the difference and similarities of these characters juxtaposed throughout their fight. Both are brutal in terms of their methods, both have their own voices in their head to deal with, and both of them are often heroes who are misunderstood. Sometimes they seem like the bad guys while trying to do the heroic thing. Their initial fight here doesn't last long though, as Moon Knight uses his sword to make Deadpool admit defeat, with him surrendering, croaking out, "Uncle." And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not consider subscribing? Click that subscribe button. It feeds the algorithm. It's good for your soul. You should do it. Number 9. Black Panther. During Age of Khonshu in the 2018 run of Avengers, in issue number 33, Moon Knight faced off against pretty much all of the Avengers. One that he faced directly was Black Panther. Now, when he confronted T'Challa in Wakanda with his army of basically Khonshu worshippers, his presence was so intimidating, in addition to his previous encounters with Iron Fist, and Doctor Strange, that the two didn't even have to fight. Instead, Black Panther simply chose to surrender. Of course, this was strategic, but the fact remains that Moon Knight got what he wanted, a willful surrender from Black Panther without even having to come to blows. Instead, he just intimidated T'Challa into surrendering to him, even if it was, like I said, also possibly a strategic play on Black Panther's side. T'Challa would still end up imprisoned, tormented, and bound, forced to bow down to the power of Khonshu in the next issue. Number 8. Ultimate Spider-Man. When it comes to the Ultimate Universe, Moon Knight is an even more terrifying vigilante. At one point, he faces off against the Ultimate Universe version of Peter Parker's Spider-Man and manages to scare him off with how crazy and how powerful he is, and how scary he is, to be honest. Pretty impressive when you consider that normally Spider-Man would be considered more physically strong and overall more powerful than Mark and his Moon Knight persona. Why were these two even fighting? Well, Moon Knight has mistaken Spider-Man here for a criminal, but even Spider-Man was just intimidated by the hero, and instead of sticking around, opted to just escape the fight instead. It's not a straight up defeat, but making Spider-Man retreat is not easy to do in most cases, and I personally would still consider if somebody retreats that they kind of lost that fight because they left. Number 7, Ghost Rider. How do you humble the Ghost Rider? How about stealing his wheels? For Robbie Reyes, that's one of the worst things you can do, steal his car, and that's exactly what Moon Knight set out to do and accomplished. While Robbie was asleep, Moon Knight basically managed to jack his car, which also drained Robbie of much of his power as Ghost Rider, as that power was actually tied to his car. Moon Knight simply took the car and drove off into the night with it in issue number 33, part 1 of the Age of Khonshu story from the 2018 run of Avengers. This was also the first part of that story, and to really humble Robbie Reyes, he was only one of a few heroes who had their source of power taken by Moon Knight, all in this one single issue. Number 6, Spider-Man. Not only has Moon Knight very physically humbled Spider-Man from the Ultimate Universe, or rather I guess I should say the old Ultimate Universe anyway, but he's also humbled the Spider-Man of Earth 616 in a very personal way. At one point, Mark Spector adopted certain personas which acted as additional split personalities as part of his dissociative identity disorder. You might be familiar with Stephen Grant, Jake Lockley, and Mr. Knight, but these personas were unlike any of those that Moon Knight sometimes adopts and uses. But these personas that I'm talking about here were unlike any of those others that Moon Knight sometimes adopts and uses that you probably are familiar with. These were people that existed separate from Mark, who he was basically impersonating, other heroes, one of them being Spider-Man. He donned Spider-Man's costume, literally impersonating him as he fought against the criminal underground of LA. At one point, this prompts Spider-Man, who was wrongfully, of course, getting critiqued for some of what Mark was up to ask Mark if he indeed dressed up as him and attacked an adult nightclub, to which Mark confirms, yes, he did. A little. Number 5, Captain Marvel. This one was particularly brutal, especially for me as a Carol fan. Another hero who was targeted during the Age of Khonshu story in the 2018 run of the Avengers was none other than Captain Marvel herself, Carol Danvers. Carol and Tony, aka Iron Man, were the last line of defense when it came to protecting the power of the Star Brand, which Khonshu wanted most of all. And when Moon Knight came to collect, he made a surprisingly easy work of Carol here. He used the powers of Ghost Rider to basically incapacitate her, seemingly trapping her in the trunk of Robbie Reyes' Ghost Rider car. But as embarrassing as that predicament was for Captain Marvel, at least it was only very temporary. She quickly recovered, escaping from the trunk and flying in to save Starbrand and Iron Man, who according to Moon Knight looked like he was ready to consider handing over the young Starbrand host to Moon Knight and Khonshu due to the threat of Mephisto. In fact, even later, Iron Man's like, whatever you do, like, just you keep Starbrand. I probably shouldn't hold on to her. Number 4, Khonshu. I don't know if we exactly consider Khonshu to be a hero per se. He's kind of more neutral. He's done some good and often acts from a place of, believing, I would say, he's doing what is right, but he's not always correct about that. And sometimes even his best of intentions lead him to doing morally questionable things, let's say. Like in Age of Khonshu, when he struck out against the Avengers. He did this because he believed it needed to be done to defeat Mephisto, believing he needed to conquer Earth to, in essence, protect it from the Mephisto army that threatened to take control. So he was doing all this to, protect Earth. However, he was kind of wrong in that, because also conquering people, is that protecting them? Not really. And in the end, this prompted even his own avatar, Mark Spector, Moon Knight, to turn on him, with Moon Knight winning over the power of the Phoenix Force and using his own 2 fists of Khonshu to help defeat the Moon God. Or rather, his fists of Phoenix, really, at that time, I should say. Number 3, Daredevil. These two have a brief fight in the 1980 series of Moon Knight in issue number 13. Here, Daredevil is hot on the trail of a villain known as the Jester. Unfortunately, Moon Knight decides to interfere, as he cannot allow DD to apprehend this criminal yet. He cuts the zip line that Daredevil is using to cut across part of the city, and Daredevil stumbles, or rather falls, sort of tumbles into an arcade, which discombobulates his radar sense, because as we know with Daredevil, he really needs his hearing to actually be able to see, making it pretty much impossible for him to see, or it's pretty wonky in that arcade due to all the arcade noise. The two get in a scuffle, and while DD doesn't do a terrible job, I would say, of fighting against Moon Knight, considering at this moment he truly is really blind as a bat since his radar sense is affected, in the end he's defeated by Moon Knight, who throws his own billy club back at DD. Fortunately, right afterwards, the two heroes talk and end up deciding to team up, as is usually the way of these things. But still, I mean, it's a Moon Knight comic, so what do we expect when Moon Knight and Daredevil fight? In a Moon Knight comic, I'm gonna expect Moon Knight to win, and he does. Number 2, Thor. Thor and Moon Knight had a very brief fight at the beginning of the Age of Khonshu event, where Thor was quickly put in his place. He does get revenge later on though, but that's a point for another list. The fight didn't last long, mainly because Moon Knight was actually able to wield Mjolnir. But not only that, not really so much wield, he was able to control the hammer. He was able to easily take it for himself. Thor, in fact, is one of the first heroes Moon Knight faces off with during this story, which is made all the more impressive when you consider that perhaps, apart from Hulk, Thor is often considered to be one of, if not the strongest Avenger that we have. Moon Knight simply lets Thor know that the metal his hammer is made of, Uru, believed to be one of the oldest metals in the universe, actually comes from an orb of night. That is a moon. It's moon metal, guys. It's moon rock. And because it is in essence made of that powerful moon rock, it's within Moon Knight's control to manipulate said weapon, since he's an avatar of the god of the moon. Number 1, Moon Knight. Yep. At one point, Moon Knight defeated himself. He actually also faced himself in the very important Moon Knight story told throughout the Avengers, Age of Khonshu. Here, Moon Knight in the end realizes that he kind of might be the problem here and decides that, he's done working for Khonshu. He's kind of done with gods, preferring to pray only to himself. In his final fight in the story against Black Panther, he ends up on the losing side of this fight and begs for Black Panther to finish it. To be clear, this is another fight that happens with Black Panther later on, not the first one that I talked about earlier on. However, Black Panther refuses to take Mark's life, permanently defeating Mark here. Instead, Mark decides to just finish it himself because he has to finish that prayer. So he punches himself so hard that he's basically reborn as the Phoenix.